Hi, today we're going to dig deeper into estimating and preparing takeoffs. My name is Abdullah. I'm the owner of Bidding Enterprise. Bidding Enterprise is a specialized estimating and consulting company. Work with contractors such as yourself, and we try to win more jobs for you. So this is our bread and butter. So in this video, whatever I'm going to tell you is exactly what we do in-house to prepare estimates for our customers. So the idea for preparing estimates is pretty straightforward. You got to have a baseline cost of a job, and then you build your supervision, general requirements, and contingencies and overhead and profit margins on top. But the number has to be is such that it's not only a winning number, but it's also a profitable number. So there is a fine line in getting a job and actually making money. It's quite possible that you underbid something and you get the job, but you end up losing money from your pocket. And at the same time, if you bid too high, then the chances of you getting the job are almost zero. So how do we do it? And you can follow exactly the same methods and come up with estimates for your jobs. So the first thing is the baseline. So you get a set of drawings from your, let's say if you're a subcontractor, then you get those drawings from a GC, and he wants you to cover a certain scope. So what you do or what people used to do in the past is they used to print out all those drawings, and then they used to use that roller pens and highlighters and come up with a list of quantities on a piece of paper to determine what exactly is needed in this particular job. And time has proven that this is not a very efficient way. And secondly, the chances of you missing out on vital information is pretty high. So what I recommend for you is to use some sort of software. There are tons of software out there. They more or less do exactly the same thing. So for example, if you use Bluebeam or PlanSwift, then you can load the documents in the software, and rather than using a physical pen, now you can mark up the drawings on a computer, and the computer arranges everything in an organized manner. And then you can highlight those things which you have covered, you can highlight those which need some sort of clarifications. So it's a pretty slick tool that everybody should use these days. I don't think that there should be anybody using the manual way of estimating jobs these days because it's too risky. Secondly, what I've learned many times after talking to some potential customers is they say, hey, I can get this thing done in a couple of hours. So for example, if you are a concrete contractor, then what people used to do is rather than coming up with the quantities for each individual material, so for example, you need concrete. And for concrete, you can have 3500 psi concrete, you can have 4000 psi concrete. So rather than having this data available, what people used to do is take the total length of the footing and then all three dimensions and then just multiplying it. And they have this thumb rule in their mind where they say, I have total cubic yards for this particular footing, and this is my number. If I multiply it by, let's say, 1000, then that should give me the total cost for this particular job. So I call it thumb rule estimating because in this particular one, you are not taking into account those smaller details which can make or break the job. So for example, if it is an epoxy coated rebar and you just multiply it by a certain number, but you haven't looked at the rebar specifications, so the chances of you getting the job are pretty high, but the chances of you making actual money out of it are pretty slim. Okay, so what we do for our customers is every time we have a new set of drawings, we put them in a software. We use Swift and Bluebeam. We use variety of softwares. As a matter of fact, we use whatever software that you guys use, so that you don't have to learn our ways of doing stuff. We learn your ways, so the learning curve is on us. So for example, if you select Bluebeam, so what we do, we put the drawings in Bluebeam, and then we start looking at whether we have all the information available to prepare the takeoffs or not. Okay, so preparing takeoffs, there can be two different ways, I must say. Some people, especially when it comes to GCs, they're not really interested in smaller nitty-gritties of it. So for example, if they are preparing an estimate for plumbing, then they usually don't, I shouldn't say care, but they don't go into detail of finding all the elbows and T's and Y's. All they say is take the linear footage, horizontal risers, and then they assume that for this much linear footage there should be these many couplings there, right? But when we look at the same set of drawings from a plumbing subcontractor's perspective, then they usually go into smaller details as well. But what we do, we tend to go into detail whether it's for GC or not, unless our customer says, hey, give me assembly model rather than detailed model. So there are two different models. One is assembly model. So for example, if you have a footing, then the footing has concrete in it, the footing has rebar in it, form work, and then excavation, backfill, etc., etc. Now, so assembly model says that to treat all these different activities and material as a one single assembly, and find cost for disassembly, which way that you just multiply the total linear footage for that particular footing, as long as you are covered for a unit assembly cost, right? So for example, if you are a drywall contractor, or if you are a GC looking at the drywall scope, then you have, let's say, one layer of gypsum board on each side, then you have 18 gauge studs, a 16-inch OC, and then you have insulation in between, so that becomes an assembly. Now, so for a drywall contractor, you got to price each these individual items separately, but for GC, they just say this assembly for a unit, let's say square feet, the total cost is this much, and then just multiply it by the total area of that wall, and that gives you the estimate for that. Okay, so two different approaches, but end result is the same. So what we do, we go into these smaller details, because our idea is that anything that has some sort of dollar significance to it, it should be a part of our takeoff sheet. So it's as simple as that just by looking at our estimate, you should be able to visualize the whole project. Right, so you don't really need to go and look at the drawings. So you look at it, say, we also provide you a consolidated list of materials to say how much total 3,500 cubic yard concrete is needed for this particular job. So we also give you the split that this particular footing requires 80 yards, this particular column requires 20 yards, etc., etc. But we also give you the holistic picture as well, right? So what my pro tip to you is, if you are starting out and you are learning the art of estimating, then learn the detailed version of it. You can always switch to the assembly model, but if you don't get into the smaller, finer details, then you won't actually know the pitfalls that are there. So for example, if you have a concrete pipe, let's say you are a site contractor, and the total concrete pipe length is 283 feet, right? But you know that each pipe length, it comes out in 5 feet lengths, let's say. So 280, yes, you can have the 5 feet lengths, but what about the smaller 5 feet one, or the 3 feet one, if the total length is, let's say, 283? Right, so devil lies in details, and it's extremely important that you go into the depth of it. Okay, so that's the baseline. So what we do, we put everything in a software, and then we split it in by trade, also called CSI divisions. So the guy within our team who has expertise of preparing estimate for that particular trade, he gets that part. So let's say if we get a GC estimate request, then we split it into concrete and drywall and framing and MEPs, etc., 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 and then we combine everything together to make sure that we have a comprehensive list of quantities and activities required to perform that work. So this is exactly what you need to do to prepare the takeoffs. One thing which is really the fundamentals of it, but if you look at the takeoffs, you can split it into maybe 5 different parts. So for example, there can be lengths, feet, meters, depending upon where you are in the world and what kind of units are being used. Then next to length is area, which is the multiplication of two different lengths. So for example, if you have a wall, it has a 10 feet length and 5 feet height, so the area of that wall is 10 times 5, so it's 50 square feet, right? The third one is volume, which is the multiplication of 3 dimensions: length, height, and width. Okay, so if I'm sitting in this room, so the void in this room is actually the volume. Next, you have weight. So the weight can be in pounds, in tons, in kilograms. And the last one is counts. So you can count lights, you can count the fixtures, you can count the furniture. So you got to have these basic understanding of how the dimensions work, because that is the fundamental of preparing a takeoff. So if you're starting off, start with understanding the basis of all these lengths and dimensions, and then it will become very easy for you to visualize the site or the building when you are looking at the plans. Because when you're looking at the plans, you have a 2D view, you don't have a 3D view, right? So if you are looking at a floor plan, then as if you are looking at the building from the top, right? But if you're looking at the elevations, as if you're standing, for example, if it is exterior elevations, you're standing outside the building and you're looking at the front elevation and the side elevation and the back elevation. If you are, let's say, inside a bathroom, then those 4 elevations become interior elevations. But if you don't have the basic understanding of the dimensions, then it becomes very difficult for you to look at, just by looking at the 2D sheets, to visualize the whole thing in 3D. So it's extremely important. Okay, so what happens afterwards? So once you have built the takeoffs, then you have to build a cost base. So cost base is how much it would take to build this job in terms of material and labor and equipment. We're not talking about the general requirements or the overheads or the contingencies, insurances, bonding, etc., etc. I'm talking about the material cost. How much would it cost to have, let's say, 20 doors for this particular job? How much it would cost to have the windows, not just material but also installed? How much the tile installation would cost? How much the tiles material would cost, etc., etc., etc. So you have to build on top of that the takeoff foundation. You have the cost structure, right? So you can always split it into labor, material, and equipment, etc., etc. So for material, you have to have a solid network of suppliers, because most often than not, if we reach out to a supplier, okay, and when I say we, on behalf of our customers, and that customer has no relationship with the supplier, then suppliers, they either don't come back to you with a number because they have hundreds of other requests they need to cater to, and they would probably work with those people who are more likely to give them work. So they may not get back to you in timely fashion, or B, they may not give you a preferred rate. So it's extremely important that once you have the bid strategy in place, then you know who your suppliers are. Go introduce yourself, send an email, call them, tell them that this is a job that we are bidding, and build a relationship. This way you will be able to get a better price out of it. And if your procurement is excellent, then your chances of getting the jobs, they go way up, all right? And then you get way ahead of your competition as well. So for material, reach out to different suppliers. If you are a GC, and let's say you reach out to 20 different subcontractors for bids, and they're not responding back, but you have a bid deadline to meet. So what you can do, you can, because, or I should have said it before, even if you are a GC, then in my personal opinion, you should still build your own takeoffs, and you should still build your own estimate, and that serves many purposes. So for example, if your subcontractors are not getting back to you in timely fashion with some numbers, so let's say if your job is missing concrete numbers because concrete contractors are not responding back, so you can't bid that job without concrete numbers. So what you need to do, you have to have your own estimate. That estimate can be a ballpark number, right? But I can teach you different ways, or you can use our services, and we employ different ways to make sure that the number is there and thereabouts, so that when you win the job, then you can go back to the subcontractor and say, hey, now I need this quotation because I've got the job. And if you have a job, there are two different biddings, you can say. There's a GC bidding where the owner is selecting a GC, and then there is a sub bidding where the GC has already been selected and now he is selecting the subcontractors. So if you are a GC who has already got the job, then when you ask your subcontractors to get you bids, now they know that you have the job, so they will definitely get back to you and get you the best numbers they can offer, right? But if you are bidding to get a job, then GC or subcontractor may say that I have other better things to do, so he may not get back to you. So getting that thing aside, now what happens is, so let's say you're missing a concrete number, but you have built your own takeoff, so you know exactly how much material is needed for the concrete scope, how much rebar, how much formwork, etc., etc. So you can pull these numbers from your previous estimates. You can do that, or since you are a GC, I'm assuming that you should have at least a basic understanding of what the unit numbers are. But if you don't have it and you don't use any specialized estimating companies such as Bidding Enterprise, you can go to National Construction Estimator Database, or you can go to RS Means, and it gives you a very comprehensive breakdown of labor and material and equipment and overhead and profit for the subcontractor level as well, to give you a ballpark number that for this particular job, this is how much it should be. Right? So for example, if it comes out to $300,000, and now you put that number in, you get the bid, you get the job, and now you go back to your subcontractors and say, hey, this is my number, let me know if you do it or not, if you can. Okay, and most often than not, you will find people, good skilled contractors, who will be able to do work within that ballpark number. Because what RS Means or other costing databases do, they update their numbers by zip codes. So for example, at Bidding Enterprise, we have been doing this thing for about 7 years now. We have estimated over 14,000 jobs across the US, all 50 states. And we have our own internal database, right, that we can refer to. So that makes us unique from any other company out there, because we don't just rely on RS Means, even though we do have access to all these databases, but we have our own cost tracking or price tracking sheets. And we can plug some zip codes, and it spits out the cost trends for a particular item in a certain area, right? But you can use all these databases anyways. Okay. So once you have the estimate prepared and a baseline, that's just the cost side of it. We haven't touched the labor side. Labor side is not so tricky, but initially, if you're starting out, it may consume a little bit more time for you. Okay, so for example, if you have to install, let's say, tile, right, and then you need 2 guys, that becomes your crew composition, and 2 guys can, let's say, do 50 square feet in a day. I'm just coming up with random numbers. So that becomes your group productivity, and you know that for 1 guy, I'm gonna charge X amount per hour to the GC. So this is how you build labor cost per unit, right? But once you have done that exercise for a couple of jobs, then you know your labor productivities and crew compositions. So next jobs, they become fairly quick, very quick. And for me, when I look at it, it's the numbers game, right? Numbers game mean you have to get in front of your potential customer, right? So when you are submitting a bid, you are telling your customer that, hey, we exist and we are willing to work with you. And if you do the same exercise over and over again with 10, 20, 15 customers, GCs or subcontractors or owners or developers, then eventually you will get something out of them. So it's numbers game. So in my personal opinion, you have to bid more than your competition, right? So you have to stay ahead of the curve, right? And you also need to get efficient at the process as well. So for example, if I tell you that if you bid 6 jobs and you win one, so now if you start bidding 12, so how many potential jobs you can win? I would say at least two, right? If you bid 18, then you should be getting 3 jobs out of 18. If we say that the win ratio is 1 out of 6, okay? So now you are trying to win 2 out of 6 jobs. Is a lot more difficult than winning 2 out of 12 jobs. So for one of my pro tip is try to get in front of more customers and bid as many jobs as possible, okay? Because if you're not bidding, then your chances of getting that particular job is zero. But what I've seen most of the time is people just pick and choose, and so when picking and choosing, they miss out on good opportunities and they end up not getting the opportunities they have chosen. So it's better that you bid a lot. I think I've made my point clear. So once you have the labor and the material and the equipment on all these pieces built together, then you build the contingencies on top. Then you build the general requirements on top: supervision, safety, inspection, bonding, insurances, temporary facilities. You name it. There are a bunch of it. There are a lot of things that you need to consider, and because these small costs, they add up. Okay, so you may not have the supervision cost in there, but what happens when you actually go and perform the work, because you have to supervise the job and somebody has to supervise it. Even if you are doing it yourself, your time is worth something, so you got to build that thing in the estimate, right? So once that is done, for example, contingency is one thing. So if you're bidding a job today and the job is not going to start in, let's say, 6 months time, then you got to see, well, nobody can see in future, but you can predict from the previous trend which way the material prices are headed. So probably in 6 months time or in a year's time, you can say I can probably have 1.5% contingency built into the system just for some unforeseen circumstances. Weather plays another major role. So make sure that you take into account all these contingency measures. So once that's done, then always go through it and go through the plans, because what we do within our company, for every single job, there are 2 estimators assigned to it. The lead estimator is the person whose job is to find mistakes or errors, so that if the estimator has overlooked on something, the lead estimator picks it up. Because what happens is, if I'm preparing an estimate, I'm blind to my own mistakes, okay? And if somebody else comes in and he asks questions, hey, how did you do it? How did you come up with this and that, etc., etc., etc. Now I can see things in a different manner. All right. So if you are a solo guy, then probably you don't have this luxury. But if you're using somebody like us, then we give you that quality control procedures and checklists and other peer reviews as a standard practice. But if you are a solo guy, then you can probably sleep on that estimate, come back next morning with a fresh mind, and then go through it one more time quickly before submitting it to the GC or to the owner or to the developer, right? So it's extremely important that you develop your own processes and you develop your own protocols, and then stick to it, and then improve those processes. And so it's an evolving thing. You can't just get expert at it overnight. There's no such thing as shortcuts. you have to go through the pain, and then just don't stop. The difference between somebody who is successful and somebody who is not is that people who are successful, they don't stop, because everyone's face failures at some point or not. Okay, and on top of that, if you like these contents, then please let me know in the comment section. If you are a busy contractor who's struggling to put together bids in time, then we would love to hear from you. We would love to work with you. Please reach out to us, give me a call, send us an email, and we would love to work with you and win you more bids. Thank you very much for listening.